This part 2 of the second video series, this follows Defeating Adventism number 84, where Bible Flockbox completely and inaccurately, that's in the previous one I'm talking about, quotes a couple verses in the passage of Isaiah 65:17 through 25. Completely gets it wrong. You should watch that video because this one here immediately follows that one where he quotes Isaiah, and then this one he's going to quote John 14:2 and 3. We're really going to examine John 14:2. He makes no comment when he just shows John 14:2 on the screen as if, well, everybody understands what that is and what it means. But let me ask you, is it clear? You're going to see his clip here in a minute. You read it and see how he presented it, which was completely amateurish. And you tell me, was it clear? John 14:2, when you do see it, you're going to see the words of Christ, and he's making a promise to his followers, and that is they're going to get a mansion. So, that's what the King James Version says. Let's watch Bible Flockbox.
And besides that, we will also have a room in the city of God, the New Jerusalem. Jesus said in John chapter 14 verses 2 through 3, "In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may be also."
First, notice in the clip, he says rooms, but on screen he shows the King James Version, which shows mansions. So what is it? Is it a room or is it a mansion? Recall in the previous video where he tried and failed to show us that in Isaiah 65:21 that those in the new heavens and new earth are going to get a house in a vineyard. Well, now what's he's trying to say? Am I going to get a house in a vineyard? Am I going to get a room, like he said? Or am I going to get a mansion, like he showed? He doesn't bother explaining it to you. Now, so which one is he trying to say? I don't know. Again, I call him Bible ignorant. Flockbox. Again, misleads his followers who think that they're getting some accurate teaching when they are getting anything but that in his videos. I'm going to properly exegete John 14:2, and we are going to get into the text. So let's look at John 14:2 in the KJV, just like he showed. And here's John 14:2. King James Translation. "In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you." So what's clear in this passage is that Christ is indeed promising us we have a future place to go. But what is this residence? Is it a mansion? Is it a room in a vineyard? Or is it a room, like Bible Flockbox said? So what is a mansion? What do you think when you read in the King James Version where Christ says you're going to get a mansion? What do you think a mansion is? Is it this? Are you going to get that mansion? Or are you going to get a room? Or again, is it going to be a house in a vineyard? Here's what I learned in my research. The KJV translators simply copied the text or the word or the translation in this particular passage of the word mansion from the Latin Vulgate Bible. So what is the Latin Vulgate Bible? Let's look here, Encyclopedia Britannica. It says what? The Latin Vulgate used by the read that again. Used by the Roman Catholic Church, primarily translated by St. Jerome. Let's keep reading. In 382, Pope Damascus commissioned Jerome, the leading biblical scholar of his day, to produce an acceptable Latin translation of the Bible. And here is Pope, now Saint Damascus I. Here we go again, Seventh-day Adventist. We have a Pope commissioning a Latin translation of a Bible, which the King James translators saw fit to copy. Actually, the King James translators also got it from Tyndale, who also copied the Latin Vulgate Bible commissioned by the church. I'm going to show you here this book first. This book here is called a tetraglot. Tetra, 4, glot translations. It's got 4 translations. 1, 2, 3, 4 laid out. The primary reason why I want to show you this tetraglot is I want you to see the Latin Vulgate translation. So in here we got not only the Latin Vulgate, we have the Greek text, we have Martin Luther's translation, and we have the 1611 KJV translation. So let's look at it here. Here's that very same book that I just held up from 1866. Here is the page where the Latin Vulgate is on the left, and that's really where I want you to focus. We're going to look at the KJV translation later. I really don't care what Luther's says. We are going to examine the Greek text later too, so we're going to examine most of these here. But you can see in the Latin Vulgate, mansions. That's where it comes from. Now, I mentioned the 1526 Tyndale Translation. What you just saw on the, what you're going to see later on the pages is a reference to a 1534 Tyndale Translation. The 1534 is Tyndale's first update to his 1526. Both the 1526 and the 1534, no matter which one I reference here in this video, both use the same word mansions in John 14:2. That didn't get changed. Now I want to show you something even bigger or grander. This is called an English hexapla. Hex. Think like hexagon. 6. So this one here, this big heavy book, has got, this is from 1841. This has got 6 different translations. This has got Wycliffe's 1388 translation, Tyndale's 1534, remember it's the same as the 1526, Cranmer's translation, which is called the Great Bible today, as well as the Geneva Bible, the Douay-Rheims, the Catholic Bible, and the 1611 Authorized Bible. Let me show you this book on screen now. So here is the exact same book. There's the title page. It's from 1841. We're going to look at these 2 pages, 3 translations per page. First side. Here's the Tyndale that I mentioned, the 1534 that's in this book, and Tyndale uses mansions. So you see it went from Latin Vulgate to Tyndale to KJV. By the way, you got the Wycliffe translation here from 1380. He doesn't use mansions, he used dwellings. But look at the Cranmer translation. He too used mansions. And that's, of course, like I said, the Great Bible. Let's look at the next page. Geneva Bible uses dwellings. Douay-Rheims, of course, Catholic Bible, of course, we're going to use mansions. KJV, Authorized Version, blown up here for you on the screen. You've already seen it in the modern Bible software. John 14:2, in my Father's house are many mansions. So now you've seen in the Latin Vulgate where mansions came from. And then you've seen all these other translations from Wycliffe to Tyndale to Cranmer to the Geneva to the Douay-Rheims to the 1611 KJV. This is the earliest one, the 1526 Tyndale, which used mansions in it. So are you convinced now you're going to get a mansion? You read in the KJV, in my Father's house are many mansions, and I go to prepare a place for you. Does mansion mean mansion? You know what? Words change over time. So we're going to start with and ask the question, why did Tyndale use the word mansion? What did mansion mean in the early 1500s in merry old England? So to answer this question, I get to pull something out of my library, which I never thought I would ever have to use or ever want to use in a video. This is the 1760 edition of Johnson's Dictionary. Do a research on Johnson's Dictionary. Fantastic story to read. This is the first dictionary of the English language ever put in. Now this is 1760. The very first edition is 1755. It's a very expensive set of books from 1755. I got the second edition here from 1760. And what I learned by researching the scholars that the Johnson's Dictionary definition, even though it's 1755 or 60, was still the definition of mansions when Tyndale put his translation together in the early 1500s. So let's look at Johnson's Dictionary. Here's the very 2 same books I held up before you. I'm going to look at volume 2, since that has M for mansions. So what does it have on the page for mansions? What does mansion mean? Isn't it interesting? Place of residence, abode, house. A very simple definition. Not the definition you may be thinking of when you think mansions, like the graphic you saw earlier, mansion. So now you've seen what mansion means, even what it meant in Tyndale's time. So here's what we don't do. We don't use dictionaries to define biblical words. All right? So now we have to ask the question, well, what does the Greek text say? So to that, we are going to use a lexicon, which I've used before in my videos, which Seventh-day Adventists cite as authoritative. So you Seventh-day Adventists can rely on this Lo and Nida 2-volume set of the lexicon here for the Greek. So let's look here. Here is the 2-volume set that we're going to use. There is the title page of that set. And we're going to look on page 732. And the Greek word is mane. And look what mane means. A place where one may dwell. Dwelling place. Notice here that there's only 2 verses underlined. John 14:2 and John 14:23. This is hugely important. This is a very rare word in the Greek language and is only found in these 2 places in the entire Bible. That fact alone merits mentioning there. But look again, what does mansion mean? Abode, dwelling place. That's all it simply means. Mane means simply abode or dwelling place. Very unique word, which again, like I said, really merits that fact being known to people reading that. You're reading a unique word there. But you know what this also does? It shows us a couple problems. Here's my 1630 KJV, King James, which I'm going to show you here in a minute. That old Bible translations, while the King James Bible is a good and reliable translation, but it does have antiquated language in it because words change. It uses the word mansions. There are limitations to using old translations today. Even the KJV translators themselves tell, and I do this all the time because I run into Seventh-day Adventists and KJV only people here to say, well, why don't you quote the King James Bible? You know, sometimes I do. And you know, and I think the King James Bible is a fine translation, but it's not the best and only translation to use. And I often retort back to them. I say, did you know that in the preface of this book, the translators in their preface tell the readers of the book, and it's on these pages, to use other translations? Why don't we follow their advice? Well, this is my opportunity now to show you that very page in this very book, what they say. Here's my same exact 1630 KJV. There's the title page that you see me hold up in many of my past videos if you watched them. Here is the first page of I forget what it is, 10, 12, 13 pages. The translators to the reader. So the translators of the KJV have a message for us. And the second to the last page of that, which you see I have it blown up. Even when it's blown up, it's hard to read with the old English. But here's a modern rendition of it. And they're quoting St. Augustine. They said, even St. Augustine saith that variety of translations is profitable for the finding out of the sense of the Scriptures. So diversity of signification and sense in the margin, where the text is not so clear, must need do good, yea, is necessary, as we are persuaded. You can read that again and read and understand that they're quoting St. Augustine, who essentially says, you know what? Sometimes to get the sense of a scripture verse, we should go to another translation, and these translators are saying, yep, that's good, and we're persuaded, and you should do so too. You know what? Follow the advice of the King James translators and use other translations. Again, the King James translation is a good translation. So are modern translations, but the King James translation is not the best translation. One last point. You read in the text, or you should have noticed, where Jesus said in John 14:2, in my Father's house are many rooms. Do you think you're just going to get some nondescript room in just some place? I want now to paint a mental image for you. When you read that verse again, think like a first century believer. When Jesus said, in my Father's house are many rooms, and I go to prepare a place for you, that was a big, big deal. The concept in the first century of dwelling in a room of the king, and this is not any king, this is the King of Kings. But the first century person knew to dwell in a room with the king, even an earthly pagan king, was to live in, well, opulence, was to live in comfort and style and security. And to dwell in the palace with the king was a huge deal. But Jesus just said, in my Father's house are many rooms. This is now the King of Kings. And if you were to think like a first century believer at that time, you go, whoa, I'm going to live with the King of Kings. I know how people live in the palace now with the pagan kings, but to go live with the King of Kings, whew, you ought to think like a first century believer in the ancient Near East when you read that verse, because that's exactly what it means. And I want you to think about it differently. Now, you know what Jesus said also? He said there's many rooms. How many rooms? I know how many rooms. Look with me here. This is the promise to Abraham. Genesis 22:17. I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand that are on the seashore. How many rooms? As many as the stars in heaven and the sand on the seashore. That many rooms. That's a lot of rooms. In summary, Bible ignorant flopbox says rooms, shows mansions, is absolutely lazy in this regard. Should have done everything that I did here to show his people what it actually means or doesn't mean, and didn't do it. He doesn't explain that these are very unique words. This mone, this Greek word, is only used twice in the entire Bible, in John chapter 14, in verse 2, and in verse 23, and that's it. No, you're not getting a modern mansion. I know some people think they're getting a mansion. No, you're not getting a mansion. You are getting a room or a dwelling place, as we saw in the Greek, but it's with the King of Kings. This is a big, big deal. This is just fantastic. You ought to think about this. So anyway, this concludes part 2 of 2. I do not foresee a part 3 of this video, since we've exhausted the whole 1-minute clip in these 2 videos. But you know what it does say, and if you're a Seventh-day Adventist and you're looking at some amateur like Bible ignorant flockbox, and he just reads John 14:2, and we're getting a mansion. Okay, again, he doesn't tell you, are you getting a mansion, are you getting a vineyard house, or are you getting a room? Horrible. Seventh-day Adventists exegeting the scripture, routinely horrible. My Seventh-day Adventist friends, get out of this religion, which is giving you bad and wrong Bible interpretations consistently.